Gamers have won, and developers are afraid of gamers. I mean, they are literally realizing that they can go out of business if they don't listen to and respect their customers. That's what we're diving into today, along with some interesting PlayStation news. Will the PS5 Pro be discounted for Black Friday? All this and more today on Daily Hub Ranks. I'm Ashley, and as always, a like on the video is delightful. So check this out. There's this big topic going around in the gaming world lately. You know how sometimes games release all buggy or half-finished and it's just a mess? Well, apparently, developers and publishers are finally starting to wake up to the fact that players are not okay with that anymore. It seems like the tolerance for rushed, broken games has really hit a wall, and some companies are realizing that pushing out an unfinished product with a "we'll fix it later" attitude doesn't fly these days. About time, right? So here's what went down. The head of Paradox Interactive, you know, the publisher behind games like Cities, Skylines, and Prison Architect, did this super candid interview with Rock Paper Shotgun. Basically, they admitted that their most recent launch, Cities, Skylines 2, was a disaster from a technical standpoint. People were excited, but when the game dropped, it was completely unoptimized and almost unplayable for a lot of fans. What's interesting is that Paradox admitted they knew there were going to be issues with performance, but they didn't realize how badly it would be perceived by players. They kind of underestimated just how fed up we all are with games that launch in rough shape. I mean, can you blame them? People spend their hard-earned cash, and they expect a polished experience. So now they're delaying Prison Architect 2 indefinitely because they don't want to make the same mistake twice. It's one of those lessons learned situations. In that interview, the Paradox team dropped a quote that really stood out to me. They said, "We knew that we would have some issues, but we underestimated how it will be perceived by players." I think that's really telling. Like, they knew things weren't going to be perfect, but they didn't think it would be that big of a deal. That's a problem, right? Because these days, people aren't putting up with it. Gamers have higher expectations now, and with how vocal communities can be online, you can't just ship a broken game and expect players to be cool with it. The kicker? They went on to say that the days of "we'll fix it over time" are fading. Players don't want to hear that anymore. I mean, sure, patches and updates have been a normal thing for a while, but if your game is barely working at launch, you're going to catch serious heat. And it's not just Paradox. We've seen it time and time again. Think about the backlash games like Cyberpunk 2077 got when it launched in a broken state. It's a hard lesson, and some developers just aren't learning it fast enough. The real question is whether Paradox will stick to their word and really change things for the better. It's easy to make promises after a rough launch, but following through is the real challenge. Oh, and speaking of interesting news, there are rumors about a PS5 Black Friday bundle coming up that could actually be worth waiting for if you're thinking of grabbing one. Apparently, there might be two options: a disc version for $425 and a digital one for $375, each bundled with some Fortnite V-Bucks. Nothing confirmed yet, but if you've been waiting to get a PS5, this could be a solid opportunity. The info comes from a pretty reliable leaker who was right about the PS5 Pro pricing too. Now, if you're wondering why the PS5 Pro won't have any discounts, well, it just launched, so don't expect a price cut on that anytime soon. But the regular PS5 bundle could be tempting if you're not looking to shell out for the Pro model. There's also some fun game update news. If you're into Hades 2, there's a big Olympic update with new content like characters and a weapon, which has a lot of people jumping back into the game. Space Marine 2 also announced some of their roadmap details, including a new PvE mode and a lethal difficulty option, which sounds brutal but fun if you're into that. And here's a heads up: if you were planning to dive into Dragon's Dogma 2, it's gotten a technical update to fix some performance issues, so now might be the time to give it a shot if you've been holding off. Oh man, Unknown 9. Awakening really out here thinking it's the next big thing, but it plays more like it forgot its own homework. Let's start with the basics. Sure, it gives you some mind control powers that let you play Puppet Master with enemies. But guess what? That's the only interesting thing it has going for it. And even that gets old fast. It's like the devs went, "Hey, we've got this one cool feature. Let's call it a day." Meanwhile, everything else about the game is about as generic as a dollar store action figure. Combat? Sloppy? Stealth? Please. It's like the game is practically begging you to skip it altogether. The AI is so stupid, you can practically take a lunch break while you're standing in plain sight, blowing things up, and the enemies still won't notice. It's like they took notes from every bad stealth game ever, threw in some tall grass, and called it a day. And the combat encounters? Yawn. you're stuck dodging the same brain-dead minions over and over, with attacks that feel less satisfying than swatting a fly. And don't even get me started on the story. They tried to pull some Last of Us and God of War vibes, but it's like they were too lazy to finish the job. The plot's more predictable than a bad soap opera, with characters so flat and lifeless, they might as well be cardboard cutouts. But hey, at least they can spout some deep mystical nonsense, right? Wrong. The dialogue and magical jargon are so convoluted, it feels like they threw random words in a blender and hoped it would sound cool. And the bugs? Oh, they're the star of the show. How does a game run this poorly on a high-end PC? The frame rate dips, the main character gets stuck in place, and the cutscenes look like they were storyboarded by a toddler. The whole thing screams unfinished, like they were rushing to release it before anyone figured out how janky it really was. In the end, Unknown 9. Awakening is like that one kid who shows up with a shiny new toy, only for everyone to realize it's broken. It tries so hard to be something special, but ends up as a mess of lazy combat, dumb AI, and bugs holding it all together with duct tape. I'd say skip this one, unless you're looking for a masterclass on how not to make an action-adventure game. I recently asked the community about their thoughts on the upcoming Dragon Age game, and the reactions were quite mixed. With some new leaks hinting at a different combat system and a narrative that picks up after the last DLC, Trespasser, there's a lot to unpack. Many fans are excited about the potential for innovation in the gameplay, with the new combat style generating a sense of hope that it could bring a fresh experience. However, others are cautious, expressing concerns that it might not live up to the legacy of the franchise. There's a prevalent fear that it could end up being another disappointment, echoing sentiments of previous titles that didn't quite hit the mark. The conversation around the game has also been heavily influenced by the ongoing debate about wokeness in gaming. Some fans are worried that the game might lean too heavily into political agendas, while others argue that exploring diverse themes doesn't necessarily compromise the game's quality. This dichotomy has sparked a lot of discussion, with some players even contemplating whether to skip the game altogether if they perceive it as overly focused on these themes. Before diving in, I want to issue a disclaimer. These leaks are ultimately rumors. They come from a person claiming to be a game tester for Dragon Age: The Vailguard. I can't independently verify their authenticity, but the insights shared sound credible. The interview with this alleged tester revealed a wealth of concerning information. The best summary I've seen comes from Grub's Mark Kern, the former team lead of the original World of Warcraft. He tweeted, "Dragon Age, Vailguard leak. Worst fears confirmed, and it's much worse than we think. This is the end of BioWare." Here are some of the key takeaways from the tester's insights. The game is described as excessively woke, with modern language interrupting immersion. For example, a Qunari companion introduces themselves with, "I identify as non-binary." Many feel that such inclusivity detracts from the escapism that games should provide. Players may find that romances are locked unless they choose a pronoun other than he, him. To fully engage with the romance system, you might need to be pansexual, limiting choices otherwise. Solace appears to be sidelined significantly, only becoming relevant at the end, which is reminiscent of disappointing plot twists in other franchises. The quality of animations is reportedly reminiscent of Mass Effect, Andromeda, leading to characters looking lifeless and poorly animated. It sounds like the narrative structure undermines player choices. Drawing comparisons to Mass Effect 3, key characters are either diminished or sidelined entirely, leading to a frustrating gameplay experience. Feedback from testers about the game's direction is reportedly ignored, especially regarding concerns about the woke elements affecting overall gameplay quality. Gameplay mechanics. Certain segments, like the gameplay in the Fade, are described as tedious and unengaging, filled with fetch quests. Major characters from previous titles, such as Varric, have been relegated to minor advisory roles. Overall, the outlook for this game is bleak. It sounds like a project that might not resonate well with longtime fans, and early pre-sale numbers aren't promising either. Stay tuned for more updates as they come. So, Sony just lost a pretty significant court battle in the EU over PlayStation game add-ons, and it might have some big implications for the gaming industry. The case was about software made by a UK company called Detel. They sold these third-party add-ons that let players in games like MotorStorm get infinite boosts or use motion sensors with their consoles. Sony wasn't happy about it and argued that Detel's software was basically latching onto their games like a parasite. They said it violated EU copyright laws, which are meant to protect creators' rights over their work, like the coding behind games. But the European Court of Justice justice didn't see it that way. They ruled that Datel's software didn't actually change the source code of the PlayStation games. It just modified some variables that were temporarily stored in the console's memory. Essentially, the court said that the copyright law doesn't cover this kind of tweaking, because it doesn't alter the actual intellectual creation of the game, like the source code. So Datel wasn't doing anything illegal. This case is seen as pretty important for the modding community in gaming. Mods, or modifications, are a huge part of the gaming ecosystem, and this ruling could make it easier for third-party companies to create add-ons or mods without facing copyright infringement claims from big companies like Sony. Some people think Sony was overreaching here, trying to control too much about how people interact with their products, especially when it comes to single-player games where no one else is affected by things like cheats or mods. One of the judges even compared the situation to a reader skipping to the end of a mystery novel to find out the ending. Sure, it might not be what the author intended, but it's not illegal to use the book that way. The same logic was applied here. Just because Datel's software isn't how Sony wants the game to be played, that doesn't mean it's breaking the law. For now, this ruling supports the modding community, but it also raises questions about how far copyright protection should go in the gaming world. This could impact not just PlayStation games, but other games that thrive on mods, like Fortnite, which originally started as a mod of an older game. Some are worried that if Sony's stricter view of copyright law were adopted, it could hurt a lot of the creativity and innovation that comes from modding. So in short, Sony tried to crack down on third-party mods, but the EU court said it's not illegal, and this ruling might help protect the future of game modding in general. If you've been holding out for Spider-Man 2 DLC, it might be time to let go of that hope. Insomniac recently confirmed in their announcement for the PC port of the game that no additional story content is planned. In their words, "While we have no additional story content planned for Marvel's Spider-Man 2, we're delighted to bring all of our previously released post-launch content to the PC version, including new Game Plus, new suits and color variants, photo mode features, and more." This news is surprising to many, especially since some players uncovered hints of potential story DLC when a patch accidentally made the game's debug menu accessible. There's also a very clear tease for a notable villain in one of the side stories. Don't worry, no spoilers here. But with no story DLC on the horizon, it seems like whatever plans might have been there are no longer happening. One theory is that the Insomniac leaks from last year might have thrown a wrench into the works, but that's speculation for now. What fans can look forward to is the PC port of Spider-Man 2, which is set to launch on January 30th on Steam and the Epic Games Store. The port is being handled by Nixies, known for their quality work on past PlayStation 2 PC conversions. This version of the game will come with the typical array of PC enhancements, like keyboard and mouse support, ultra-widescreen capabilities, and graphical options to take full advantage of the platform, including enhanced ray tracing. It's bittersweet news, great for PC gamers eager to dive into the world of Spider-Man 2, but disappointing for those hoping for more story content to expand on the adventure. So, during the recent Xbox Partner Preview event, Microsoft gave us a closer look at some upcoming games, and one of the highlights was Wuchang Fallen Feathers. This Chinese action RPG, developed by Linzi and published by 505 Games, was first teased earlier this year, but this new trailer gives us a much more detailed look at the gameplay and reaffirms its 2025 release window. The new gameplay trailer showcases some of the game's combat, which looks pretty intense and flashy. We see Wuchang, the main character who's a pirate warrior suffering from amnesia and a strange illness called feathering, battling enemies and bosses. Feathering, or ornithropy, gives her unique powers, which obviously come into play during these fights. The new gameplay trailer showcases some of the game's combat, which looks pretty intense and flashy. We see Wuchang, the main character, who's a pirate warrior suffering from amnesia and a strange illness called feathering, battling enemies and bosses. Feathering, or ornithropy, gives her unique powers, which obviously come into play during these fights. The game is set in the late Ming Dynasty, in the Chinese land of Shu, and it seems like you'll be fighting through a mix of human foes and monsters that have been affected by this illness. What's cool is that the game will offer multiple endings, and the story will adapt based on the choices you make along the way. Combat-wise, Wuchang relies on swordsmanship, magic, and weapon enchantments, which adds a layer of strategy to the game. The trailer makes it clear that the game takes inspiration from other Souls-like titles, with challenging combat and slick animations that feel a bit like Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. For Xbox players, Wuchang is being seen as a potential answer to Black Myth, which hasn't officially come to Xbox yet, possibly due to an exclusivity deal with PlayStation. Overall, Wuchang Fallen Feathers looks like a game that could be one of 2025 standouts for Xbox and PC players. It's also exciting to see how it fits into the larger trend trend of Souls-like games on Game Pass, especially with the recent releases of games like Wolong, Fallen Dynasty, and Lies of P. If you're into that genre, this is definitely one to keep on your radar. Cool story of the day. So here's the deal with Red Dead Redemption's development, and why its PS3 version lagged a bit behind. Apparently, the map for the game was created even before they started working on the PS3 version. A lot of people assumed that Rockstar focused on the Xbox 360 version first, and then did the PS3 version later. And there's a reason why. In a recent video by Digital Foundry, they explained that the game's map was made before the PS3 version even began development. A former Rockstar technical director, AWEKENING, added to this on Twitter, explaining that working on the Xbox 360 was just easier because it used DirectX, a software layer that made developing for that console more straightforward. On the other hand, the PS3 was a lot more complicated. Developers had to program directly with the hardware's native language, which was harder and more time-consuming. So, it made sense for Rockstar to lead development on the Xbox 360, where they could get better results quicker. That's also why most people consider the Xbox 360 version of Red Dead Redemption to be slightly better than the PS3 version. It just ran smoother, even though the PS3 version wasn't bad. With all that technical stuff in mind, it's easy to see why the 360 version was the favorite back in the day.